Who am I?
Richard Kazimer, media veteran.
Why I got in radio is because I'm good with a knife.
Contributor in Perth, Australia.
Our friend Richard Kazimer in the United States.
How are you guys enjoying the 19th century? Is that working out for you? How can you say, I'm not making fun of you as a race, I'm making fun of you as black performers?
I think as a country, Americans are as patriotic as the most rabid UK football hooligan.
Who am I?
Richard S. Kazimer. Richard, how are you?
I'm fine, sir. How are you?
Richard's also been a radio announcer all around the United States from time to time. All right, talk to me, Richard, as if I don't know why you've rung.
How are you guys enjoying the 19th century? Is that working out for you?
Yeah, go on.
This whole Heidi-Ho show issue is getting some legs over here. Now, in listening to your callers and reading all the comments on the various news sources and websites in Australia, it seems to be running about 95% to 5%. People are in favor of what that group did.
Actually, those figures you're quoting are a bit more generous than the ones I've got. I would have said it was more 75-25. However, okay, we'll go with the figures that you're looking at.
On this side of the big billabong, it is quite a different scenario. I mean, people are just outraged as to what happened, and that sort of level of racism is still prevalent in an industrialized nation in a beautiful country such as Australia. You and I, or white people, or anybody that is not of color, are in no position to determine what is racist. Racism is not determined by the perpetrator, it's determined by the victims. So if we just turn a blind eye to this and say, oh, well, it's all going to go away.
Hang on a second, Richard. Hang on a second, Richard.
It's not going to happen.
Are you suggesting that white people can't be victims of racism?
We're not talking about a white case of racism. Let's focus specifically on this show.
You do know the performers of this weren't white, don't you?
No, I'm not aware of that.
They weren't white.
Why did they feel the need to come on in blackface? Why did they feel the need to come out and denigrate the Jackson 5 and all black performers in stereotypical 1920s minstrel show blackface? It just doesn't make any sense.
Firstly, the question I'd ask, you see, and this is something you need to consider, you're assuming that it's an affront against black people. It was an affront against the Jackson 5.
But you can't separate the two.
Of course you can.
No, you can't.
Of course you can.
How can you say, well, I'm not making fun of you as a race, I'm making fun of you as black performers? You can't do that.
Making fun of the Jackson 5. I mean, mate, apart from the fact that Michael Jackson died fairly tragically this year, and then everybody got all up and down. I mean, it was all interesting how everybody fawned over Michael Jackson after he died, yet it was a clear-cut fact that prior to his death in the United States, there wasn't one radio station in the country that was playing any of his music, and the same pretty well applied here, and suddenly everyone got a conscience and decided to play Michael Jackson's music again. But I mean, taking the mickey out of the Jacksons has been something that's been going on here for a while, because they were viewed as, and especially Michael, as being a bit unusual in the music business, and I think that prior to his demise, everybody would have thought the same. And I mean, I would imagine that there were certainly plenty of comedy shows over there that weren't backward and coming forward and poking a bit of fun at Michael, because people saw him as being, to be polite, a little bit different. And that had nothing to do with his colour, that had to do with his persona.
I disagree. Over here, he was still perhaps irrelevant as he was in his latter years. People really didn't take shots at him except about court cases and that sort of stuff. But his music, his volume of work still stands. I think we're doing apples and oranges here. For what this group did, and I understand the premise of the show, it's kind of like the old Gong Show over here. It's anything goes.
Well, I mean, it's a resurrection of a show that finished quite a few years back, and it used to be on every Saturday. In fact, originally when it started, it was on a Saturday morning. It found its way onto a Saturday night, and probably for at least a generation, there was a generation of people who would, on a Saturday night, you'd sit down, you'd watch Hey Hey, then you'd go out. You know, even when you're a young guy, you'd sit down, you'd watch Hey Hey and have some pizza or whatever for your dinner, then you'd go out. But watching Hey Hey was sort of a tradition, and it was something that I think anyway, despite the fact I've had people phone me off here saying you're dissing Hey Hey, but be that as it may, I think that it was something that had probably arguably run its course. But the great irony is, and this is great irony, having worked in the media yourself, you understand where I'm coming from when I say the moment you kick up a stink about something, you inevitably increase its success rate.
Oh, I don't think so. Not with an issue this important, an issue of racism.
Yeah, what you got to understand, though, is people here don't see it as a racist issue. That might be how it's viewed there.
That's my point.
But it's not seen that way here.
But whether you see it as an issue or not, the victims victims of it do.
Well, who are the victims?
We are not in a
Who are the
position of
victims?
determining whether it was racist or not.
No. Who are the victims? I mean, you can't argue. Richard,
anybody who took offence to it, any African
Richard,
American,
if that's the case, we won't do anything. Nobody will do anything.
Yeah.
Think about it. I mean, if the premise that we do anything by, whether it's here, whether it's in the US, or whether it's in Europe, if we measure the premise on we won't do anything if somebody gets offended, then we won't do anything.
You don't need to be the morality police or the politically correct police all the time, but you do need to take a step back and go, wait a minute, how's this thing going to wash? And I don't think the producers...
But what you fail to understand is there isn't a problem in Australia. And it was not a program that was ever shown in the United States. It was not designed for consumption by United States audiences. It was designed for consumption by Australian audiences.
Whether or not it was for local consumption still doesn't negate the fact that the world is talking about it. We do have the internet. And granted. I can go online right now and watch Australian television.
Yeah, granted. But you see, by the same token, I mean, if you start to do that, I mean, does your own country worry about the offence it might cause to other countries?
That's a good point, because I think the reason it's such an issue here right now is that this country has never seen a level of overt racism in the past 40 years as we're seeing right now because of Barack Obama. It is just frightening, the level of racism, particularly the Republican Party, and you've got these other whack jobs like teabaggers and birthers that are out there. It is unbelievable. It's like the 50s and 60s. The hatred for this man is at a level I have not seen in quite a few years, and it's very frightening. I don't mean to do a broad brush of all Australians. I just think that we need to police ourselves and to look a little further than entertainment as to who's going to be affected by this.
All right.
And I don't agree that turning a blind eye or just saying, well, it's done, so it's over with. We need to make sure that it doesn't happen again.
All right. Well, look, I've got to leave it there, Richard, because I'm out of time now. But thank you very much for taking the time to call us. It's Richard from Massachusetts.